everyone, here I am again with a different story and video. My name is Mika. Today's story, Snow White and the Dwarfs. In olden times, there lived a princess whose beauty caught everyone's attention. Her name was Pamuk, which means cotton. Losing her mother at a young age, Snow White lived in the palace. After her mother died, her father, the king, remarried. Snow White's stepmother always treated her poorly. Her father always did everything to protect his little girl. But whenever he was away from the palace, the stepmother continued her wickedness towards her. As the years passed, Snow White's beauty became legendary. Her stepmother was extremely jealous of this beauty. The stepmother's sole purpose with her wicked acts was to be the only beautiful woman in the kingdom. The stepmother also had magical powers. One evening, standing before her magic mirror, she asked, "Mirror, tell me, is there any woman more beautiful than me in this world?" The mirror replied, "Of course, the most beautiful girl in this world is Snow White." Angered by this answer from the magic mirror, the stepmother smashed everything around her. As time went on, the stepmother could no longer bear Snow White being more beautiful and living happily in the palace. She decided to make a plan to eliminate Snow White and hired a hunter for this task. While Snow White was strolling in the vast garden of the palace, the hunter abducted her. The hunter decided to eliminate her in a deserted forest, but was so enchanted by her beauty that he couldn't do it. The stepmother had instructed the hunter to kill Snow White and bring back her blood-stained dress. Not wanting to harm the princess, the hunter killed a deer instead, smeared its blood on Snow White's dress, and left her free in the forest, warning her not to go anywhere else. Lost and alone in the deserted forest, Snow White didn't know what to do. She walked aimlessly for days. Eventually, weakened by hunger, she stumbled, fell into a pit, and fainted. When Snow White opened her eyes, she found herself in a bed. Looking around in fear and surprise, she saw several dwarfs looking at her joyfully. Initially apprehensive about the dwarfs, Snow White soon warmed up to their friendly and helpful nature. As time passed, Snow White became friends with the dwarfs and began living with them in their land. Meanwhile, the stepmother at the palace learned that the hunter hadn't killed Snow White. She constantly watched Snow White through her magic mirror and was very disturbed by her survival. The stepmother, disguising herself as a kind old woman, went straight to the forest where the princess lived. When the dwarfs were away and the princess was alone at home, she knocked on the door. She said to Snow White, "My dear girl, I'm thirsty. Could you give me some water?" Snow White quickly brought water from the well for the old woman. Pleased with this act, the old woman handed Snow White a red apple, saying, "You did me a favor, and in return, I'll give you this beautiful apple from the forest." She gave Snow White the poisoned apple. Unable to resist the apple's beauty, Snow White took a bite and immediately fell to the ground. The old woman vanished. The dwarfs found Snow White unconscious and brought her to her bed, but she did not wake up for days. The wise dwarf made medicines to open Snow White's eyes. After a few days, While the dwarf stood sadly by her bedside, Snow White suddenly opened her eyes. The dwarfs were overjoyed. Snow White returned to her happy days, continuing to live with the dwarfs. After a while, Snow White told the dwarfs that she missed her father, the king, and wanted to see him. The dwarfs then made a plan. When the king came to the forest for hunting one day, with the dwarfs' help, Snow White quickly went to her father's side. The king was overjoyed to see his beautiful daughter. Snow White told her father all that had happened. Upon learning the truth, the king had his wicked wife imprisoned for her deeds. Thus, Snow White began living in the palace again. A few dwarfs also came with her. Together, they lived happily both in the palace gardens and in the land of the dwarfs. This is where our story ends, friends. If you want to stay updated with new and interesting stories, subscribe to our channel, like our video, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Wishing you always stay happy in fairy tales. Goodbye.